The champagne flute slipped from Rebecca Martinez's hand, the crystal shattering against the Italian marble floor of her sister's Scottsdale mansion. 30 pairs of perfectly manicured eyes turned toward her, some with pity, others with barely concealed judgment. But it wasn't the broken glass that made her heart race. It was the words that had just echoed across the sun-drenched patio, spoken loud enough for every guest at Amanda's baby shower to hear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Well, at least one of us turned out to be a success. Amanda Martinez-Thompson stood there in her flowing, dusty rose maternity dress, one hand resting protectively on her 7-month bump, the other gesturing dismissively toward Rebecca. Her smile was practiced, the kind that had charmed clients in boardrooms and impressed neighbors at country club events. But beneath that polished veneer was something sharper, something that had been festering for years. I mean, look at her. Amanda continued, her voice carrying that particular tone of concerned disappointment that only sisters can perfect. 35 years old, no husband, no children, still playing dress-up in that uniform. Some of us grew up, Becca. Some of us built real lives. The silence that followed was deafening. Rebecca could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the familiar burn of being misunderstood, underestimated, reduced to what others could see on the surface. She stood there in her simple black dress, the one she'd bought specifically for this occasion, trying to blend in with Amanda's crowd of successful wives and corporate executives. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, no makeup except for a touch of mascara, her hands calloused from years of training that these women would never understand. Rebecca Martinez had always been the quiet one, the observer in rooms full of talkers. At 35, she carried herself with the kind of controlled precision that came from 18 years of military service, though most people mistook her stillness for uncertainty. Her colleagues in Army intelligence knew better. They knew that behind her dark eyes was a mind trained to process information faster than most people could speak, to read body language like a foreign dialect, to remain calm when others fell apart. She had arrived at Amanda's baby shower that Saturday afternoon, carrying a carefully wrapped gift and wearing the mask of civilian normalcy she'd perfected over years of family gatherings. The drive from her temporary apartment in Phoenix had taken 45 minutes. 45 minutes of rehearsing conversations in her head, preparing for the inevitable questions about her personal life, her career choices, her failure to follow the traditional path that Amanda had laid out so perfectly. The Martinez sisters had grown up in El Paso, in a neighborhood where military families mixed with Border Patrol agents and the children of factory workers. Their father, Roberto, had spent his days bent over car engines, his nights bent over bills, always working toward something better for his daughters. Their mother, Carmen, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. Her teacher's salary stretched thin, but her expectations for her girls reaching toward the sky. Amanda had been the golden child from the beginning, valedictorian, full scholarship to Arizona State MBA before she turned 25. She'd married Michael Thompson, a corporate lawyer whose family owned half of Scottsdale, and built a life that looked perfect from every angle. The kind of life that made their mother beam with pride at church, the kind of success that validated every sacrifice their parents had made. Rebecca had taken a different path. While Amanda was collecting academic honors, Rebecca was fascinated by maps, by strategy, by the complex puzzles of global conflicts she read about in library books. When she announced her intention to join the Army after high school, the family dinner table had erupted. Amanda had been particularly vocal, arguing that Rebecca was throwing away her potential, choosing the easy way out instead of challenging herself in college. The military is for people who can't figure out what else to do with their lives, Amanda had said that night 17 years ago. The words had stung then, and they still carried venom now. But Rebecca had found her calling in the structured world of military intelligence. She'd excelled in ways that didn't translate to civilian dinner party conversations. Her expertise in counterintelligence operations, her fluency in Arabic and Farsi, her ability to analyze terrorist communication patterns and predict insurgent movements. None of these achievements fit neatly into Amanda's world of marketing campaigns and social media metrics. Standing in her sister's pristine backyard, surrounded by women discussing organic baby food and private school waiting lists, Rebecca felt the familiar weight of being an outsider in her own family. The broken champagne flute at her feet seemed like a metaphor for everything she'd never quite managed to get right in civilian life. She bent down to pick up the larger pieces, her movements automatic, military precise. "Oh, don't worry about that," chirped Katie Sullivan, one of Amanda's college friends. "The housekeeper will get it. You probably aren't used to handling delicate things anyway, right? I mean, with your job and all." Rebecca straightened slowly, glass shards still in her palm. Around her, the conversation had resumed in that careful way that meant everyone was pretending they hadn't heard Amanda's cutting remarks, but the damage was done. She could see it in their faces, the pity, the awkward glances, the way they'd mentally categorized her as Amanda's unfortunate sister, the one who'd never quite measured up. What they didn't know, what Amanda had never bothered to learn, was that Rebecca Martinez had just returned from an 18-month classified assignment that had prevented a coordinated terrorist attack on 3 major U.S. cities. They didn't know that she'd been personally commended by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that her intelligence work had saved lives in ways that would never make headlines. They didn't know that the dress-up uniform Amanda mocked represented nearly 2 decades of service to her country, including 4 combat deployments and decorations for valor that sat quietly in a drawer in her sparse apartment. But Rebecca had learned long ago that explaining herself to people who'd already made up their minds was like speaking a language they'd never bother to learn. So she stood there, holding pieces of broken crystal, watching her sister accept congratulations on her nursery design while the sun beat down on the desert landscape around them. She thought about leaving. Her car keys were in her purse, and she could slip out through the side gate, drive back to Phoenix, and pretend this afternoon had never happened. It wouldn't be the first family event she'd left early, another disappointment added to Amanda's growing list of her sister's social failures. But something kept her rooted to that spot on the patio. Maybe it was the way their mother had looked so hopeful when she'd called to make sure Rebecca would attend. Maybe it was the stubborn part of her that refused to run from conflict, the same part that had kept her steady under mortar fire in Kandahar. Or maybe it was simply the recognition that this moment, this public dismissal, was about more than just sibling rivalry. It was about the assumption that some lives mattered more than others, that some sacrifices were more valuable than others. Martinez-Thompson chose that moment to step onto the patio from inside the house, his phone pressed to his ear, his face creased with the kind of concern that suggested an important call. Rebecca had always liked her brother-in-law, appreciated his quiet demeanor, and the way he seemed to genuinely care for Amanda despite her sharp edges. He was a good man who'd married a complicated woman, and Rebecca had always wondered. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What he really thought about the family dynamics he'd inherited. As he ended his call and slipped the phone into his pocket, his eyes swept across the assembled guests, landing briefly on Rebecca. Something flickered across his expression, a moment of recognition that seemed to go beyond the usual family gathering pleasantries. But before Rebecca could analyze it further, Amanda was moving toward her husband, her voice cutting through the desert air with the precision of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "Perfect timing, honey," Amanda said, linking her arm through Michael's. "I was just telling everyone about Rebecca's career choices. Maybe you can explain to her why stability matters when you're trying to build a real life." The trap was set, the audience assembled, and Rebecca found herself at the center of a stage she'd never auditioned for, holding broken glass and wondering how family gatherings had become battlefields she was always destined to lose. Martinez-Thompson had always possessed an eye for details that others missed. It came from years of practicing law, where success often hinged on noticing the small inconsistencies that unraveled entire cases. As he surveyed the baby shower guests scattered across his backyard, something about his sister-in-law caught his attention in a way it never had before. The way Rebecca held herself wasn't the posture of someone defeated by Amanda's cutting words. Her spine remained straight, her shoulders squared, even as she knelt to collect the broken crystal. There was something almost ceremonial in her movements, a precision that spoke of discipline most civilians never developed. Michael had seen that bearing before, though he couldn't immediately place where. The afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the patio, highlighting the tension that rippled through the gathered women like heat waves rising from the desert floor. Amanda's friends had arranged themselves in small clusters, their conversations carefully modulated to exclude Rebecca while maintaining the pretense of social politeness. They spoke in the coded language of suburban hierarchies, where success was measured in square footage and private school tuition rates, where a woman's worth was calculated by her husband's salary and her children's achievements. Jennifer Chen, Amanda's closest friend from her MBA program, leaned toward the hostess with the kind of concerned expression reserved for discussing mutual acquaintances who'd fallen on hard times. Has she considered going back to school? I mean, it's never too late to start over, build something real. My cousin transitioned from the Peace Corps to consulting, and now she's making 6 figures. Amanda's response carried the weight of years of frustration, the accumulated disappointment of family dinners, where Rebecca's accomplishments never quite measured up to civilian expectations. She's stubborn, always has been. Dad used to say she had potential, but potential doesn't pay bills or give you grandchildren. She's 35, Jenny. Most women her age are planning their children's futures, not playing soldier. The cruelty in her words wasn't intentional, Michael realized. Amanda genuinely believed she was being helpful, offering the tough love that might finally push her sister toward what she considered a normal life. But watching Rebecca's careful composure, seeing the way she methodically collected each shard of glass without cutting herself, he began to suspect there were layers to his sister-in-law that his wife had never bothered to explore. Rebecca had always been an enigma at family gatherings. She arrived punctually, brought thoughtful gifts, and listened more than she spoke. When conversation turned to current events, she offered insights that seemed unusually well-informed, as if she possessed access to information beyond what appeared in mainstream news sources. Her observations about international conflicts carried a specificity that suggested first-hand knowledge, rather than academic study. During their wedding reception 3 years ago, Michael remembered asking Rebecca about her work, genuinely curious about military life beyond the Hollywood portrayals that shaped most civilians' understanding. Her response had been frustratingly vague, mentioning intelligence work and overseas assignments without providing the kind of concrete details that made for interesting dinner conversation. At the time, he'd attributed her reticence to modesty or perhaps the mundane nature of bureaucratic military jobs. Now, watching her navigate Amanda's public humiliation with the kind of controlled grace that suggested extensive experience with hostile environments, he wondered if there might be more to Rebecca's silence than simple modesty. The phone call he'd just concluded had been with a client whose son served in Army Special Operations, and their conversation about classified assignments and security clearances had left Michael with a heightened awareness of how much civilians didn't understand about military service. Maria Rodriguez, one of Amanda's co-workers from the marketing firm, had joined the circle of women discussing Rebecca's future prospects. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to solving problems through strategic planning and targeted interventions. Maybe we could help her network. I know several companies that value military experience, especially for logistics or project management roles. Nothing too demanding, but something that would give her structure while she figures out what she really wants to do. The condescension in her tone was unmistakable, the assumption that Rebecca needed rescue from a career choice that had obviously failed to provide adequate life satisfaction. These women, successful in their own spheres, couldn't conceive of a world where military service represented achievement rather than escape, where national security work might be more challenging and consequential than quarterly profit reports or brand positioning strategies. Rebecca finished collecting the broken glass and straightened slowly, her dark eyes scanning the assembled guests with the kind of systematic assessment that made Michael think of security personnel evaluating potential threats. But there was no hostility in her expression, only a weary recognition that she was surrounded by people who would never understand her choices or value her contributions. Lisa Park, the newest addition to Amanda's social circle, seized the momentary silence to offer her own perspective on Rebecca's situation. Her voice carried the bright optimism of someone who believed every problem had a solution, if approached with sufficient enthusiasm and positive thinking. You know what might help? Speed dating events. There are so many successful single men in Phoenix who would appreciate a woman with her background. Maybe someone in security consulting or corporate training. She could leverage her military experience while building a more traditional life. The suggestions flowed freely now, each woman contributing her own version of how Rebecca might be transformed into someone more recognizable, more acceptable to their social paradigm. They spoke about her as if she weren't standing 10 feet away, as if her presence was merely theoretical, rather than immediate and uncomfortable. Amanda basked in the attention, positioning herself as the concerned sister, who'd been trying unsuccessfully for years to guide Rebecca toward better choices. Her pregnancy gave her additional authority in this context, marking her as someone who'd successfully achieved the milestones that defined adult accomplishment in their social circle. The baby shower itself served as evidence of her triumph, surrounded by friends celebrating her impending motherhood while her sister remained conspicuously outside the circle of feminine achievement. Michael found himself studying Rebecca's face, searching for signs of the pain that Amanda's words must have inflicted. But her expression remained neutral, almost professionally detached, as if she'd developed immunity to this particular brand of family disappointment. Her silence wasn't the defensive withdrawal he'd expected, but something more complex, the quiet confidence of someone who knew things these women would never understand. The desert heat was beginning to affect some of the guests, and several had moved toward the shaded areas near the house, seeking relief from the relentless Arizona sun. But Rebecca remained where she was, apparently unbothered by the temperature that was driving others indoors. Her comfort with harsh conditions was another small detail that struck Michael as significant, though he couldn't articulate why. Amanda's voice rose above the murmur of side conversations, drawing attention back to her role as gracious hostess and concerned sister. I keep hoping she'll meet someone who can help her see what she's missing. Marriage, children, building something lasting together. The military is fine for young people who need direction, but at some point, you have to ask yourself what you're really building, what legacy you're leaving. The words hung in the desert air like a challenge, an invitation for Rebecca to defend herself, or finally acknowledge the inadequacy of her choices. The assembled women waited with the barely concealed anticipation of spectators hoping for drama, while pretending to desire reconciliation. But Rebecca's response, when it came, surprised them all with its quiet dignity. She simply smiled, a small expression that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "You're right, Amanda. Some of us do need to ask ourselves what legacy we're leaving." Michael felt something shift in that moment, a subtle change in the dynamics that he couldn't quite define. Rebecca's words seemed to carry multiple meanings, layers of significance that the other women missed entirely. But he caught something in her tone, a quiet authority that made him look at her more carefully, seeing details he'd previously overlooked. The afternoon was about to take a turn that none of them anticipated, though Michael was beginning to suspect that his sister-in-law might be far more than any of them had ever imagined. The gift table groaned under the weight of pastel-wrapped packages, each one a testament to the elaborate rituals of suburban motherhood that Amanda had embraced with characteristic thoroughness. Silver rattles from Tiffany, organic cotton onesies with price tags that exceeded most people's weekly grocery budgets, and a European stroller system that cost more than many families spent on rent. Rebecca had contributed a handmade quilt, sewn during quiet hours between assignments, its simple blue and yellow pattern looking modest among the designer offerings. Amanda's mother-in-law, Martinez-Thompson, had arrived fashionably late, her entrance marked by the kind of subdued commotion that accompanied women accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. She was a formidable presence in Scottsdale society, the kind of woman who served on hospital boards and chaired charity galas, whose opinion could make or break social standing in their carefully stratified community. Patricia embraced Amanda with the practiced warmth of someone who'd perfected the art of public affection, her designer handbag and understated jewelry marking her as old money rather than the newer wealth that characterized much of their neighborhood. She'd raised 3 successful children, including Michael, and had strong opinions about the life choices that led to genuine happiness versus those that merely provided temporary satisfaction. As she surveyed the assembled guests, Patricia's attention inevitably settled on Rebecca, the obvious outsider in this gathering of corporate wives and professional women. Amanda had mentioned her sister's unconventional lifestyle during previous family dinners, always with the tone of someone discussing a relative who'd chosen poverty over prosperity, rebellion over responsibility. The conversation that had been swirling around Rebecca's inadequacies found new life with Patricia's arrival. Amanda seized the opportunity to position herself as the dutiful daughter-in-law who'd tried unsuccessfully to guide her wayward sister toward better choices, her voice carrying the martyred tone of someone who'd shouldered burdens others had shirked. Katie Sullivan, ever eager to curry favor with Amanda's mother-in-law, launched into an elaborate description of Rebecca's failure to achieve traditional milestones, her words carefully crafted to demonstrate her own superior understanding of proper life priorities. She spoke about career versus family as if they were mutually exclusive choices, about stability versus adventure, as if one inherently possessed more value than the other. Jennifer Chen contributed her own observations about the importance of building something tangible, something that would provide security and social recognition. Her recent promotion to senior marketing director had given her additional confidence in dispensing life advice, particularly to women who'd made choices she considered fundamentally flawed. Rebecca listened to this dissection of her life choices with the kind of detached interest she'd once applied to analyzing enemy communication patterns. The women's assumptions about military service revealed more about their limited worldview than about her actual experience. But correcting their misconceptions would require explanations she wasn't authorized to provide and wouldn't be understood even if she were. Martinez-Thompson, however, surprised everyone by asking a direct question that cut through the swirling speculation. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to getting straight answers rather than diplomatic evasions, the kind of directness that had served her well in boardrooms and social negotiations. "Rebecca, dear, Amanda mentioned you've been overseas recently. Where exactly have you been stationed?" The question hung in the desert air like a challenge, demanding specificity from someone who'd grown expert at providing vague responses to civilian curiosity. Rebecca felt the familiar tension between operational security requirements and social expectations, the delicate balance between maintaining cover and avoiding outright deception with family members. Her response was carefully measured, mentioning assignments in the Middle East without specifying locations, referring to intelligence work without describing actual operations. But Patricia's follow-up questions demonstrated a more sophisticated understanding of military structure than the other women possessed, suggesting knowledge gained through personal connections rather than casual observation. Amanda, sensing that the conversation was drifting away from her carefully constructed narrative about Rebecca's poor choices, attempted to redirect attention toward the more familiar territory of personal relationships and domestic achievement. Her voice carried an edge of impatience with what she considered irrelevant details about Rebecca's work, as if military service were merely an extended adolescent phase rather than a legitimate career. But Michael had been listening with growing intensity to the exchange between his mother and sister-in-law, picking up nuances that the other guests missed entirely. Patricia's questions weren't casual social inquiry but something more pointed, as if she were testing Rebecca's responses against information she already possessed. The realization struck him with sudden clarity. His mother's late husband, Michael's father, had served in military intelligence during the Cold War, though the family had learned most details only after his death when classified documents were finally released. Patricia had spent decades as a military wife before his father's transition to civilian law practice, and she understood the world of security clearances and operational secrecy in ways that Amanda's friends never could. Rebecca's careful answers weren't evasion born of modesty, but operational discipline maintained out of necessity. The vague references to overseas assignments weren't attempts to make mundane work sound mysterious, but efforts to discuss classified operations without violating security protocols. Her reluctance to provide specific details wasn't antisocial behavior but professional obligation. Michael watched his mother's expression shift subtly as she processed Rebecca's responses, seeing recognition dawn in her eyes. Patricia had spent enough years navigating military social circles to distinguish between genuine intelligence work and the administrative positions that most civilians associated with military service. Rebecca's careful phraseology, her instinctive operational security, even her physical bearing suggested involvement in activities far more significant than the routine assignments Amanda assumed she'd been performing. The gift opening ceremony commenced with the kind of orchestrated enthusiasm that characterized all of Amanda's social events. Each present was unwrapped with theatrical appreciation, the giver's thoughtfulness praised. The item's perfect suitability for the nursery documented with professional quality photographs that would later populate social media feeds. Rebecca's handmade quilt was received with polite acknowledgement rather than genuine enthusiasm, its simple craftsmanship overshadowed by the expensive items that surrounded it. Amanda held it briefly for the obligatory photograph before setting it aside in favor of more impressive offerings, her dismissive handling of the gift serving as another small humiliation in the afternoon's accumulating pile. But Patricia Thompson lifted the quilt from where Amanda had discarded it, examining the intricate stitching with the eye of someone who understood the time and skill required for such work. Her fingers traced the careful patterns, noting the precision of the construction, the quality of materials chosen for durability rather than appearance. "This is extraordinary work," Patricia said, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. "Where did you learn to quilt like this?" Rebecca's response was characteristically understated, mentioning time between assignments, quiet hours that needed filling, the therapeutic nature of work that produced something beautiful and lasting. But Patricia's follow-up questions revealed her understanding that such skills were often developed in environments where traditional entertainment wasn't available, where long deployments required creative solutions for maintaining mental equilibrium. The other women had moved on to discussing nursery themes and baby name possibilities, but Patricia continued her quiet conversation with Rebecca, her questions becoming more specific and her expression more thoughtful. Michael realized that his mother was conducting her own form of intelligence gathering, piecing together details that painted a picture very different from Amanda's narrative of failure and poor choices. Maria Rodriguez attempted to draw Patricia into the broader conversation about Rebecca's need for career guidance and life restructuring, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd solved similar problems through networking and strategic positioning. But Patricia's response was unexpectedly sharp, delivered with the authority of someone who'd navigated more complex challenges than corporate restructuring and social positioning. "Some careers require sacrifices that others can't understand," Patricia said, her words directed toward the group, but her eyes remaining on Rebecca. "And some achievements can't be measured by conventional standards." The comment created an uncomfortable silence among the assembled women, who weren't accustomed to having their assumptions challenged by someone whose social position they couldn't dismiss. Amanda's expression revealed confusion and slight irritation at her mother-in-law's unexpected defense of Rebecca's choices, while Rebecca herself seemed surprised by this unexpected support from an unexpected source. Michael felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, fragments of conversation and observation forming a picture that none of them had previously recognized. His sister-in-law wasn't the family disappointment that Amanda portrayed, but something else entirely. Someone whose true achievements were hidden behind operational security and modest demeanor. The afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn, though only Patricia and Michael seemed to sense the approaching revelation that would transform everyone's understanding of Rebecca Martinez. The stakes couldn't have been higher, though none of the baby shower guests understood the gravity of what hung in the balance that afternoon. While they debated nursery color schemes and preschool waiting lists, Rebecca carried the weight of knowledge that could never be shared at suburban social gatherings. 3 weeks earlier, she had returned from an assignment that prevented a coordinated attack on infrastructure targets across the southwestern United States. The intelligence she'd gathered during 18 months of deep cover work had saved thousands of lives, though the successful operation would never appear in newspaper headlines or evening news broadcasts. The irony wasn't lost on her that these women discussing her failure to achieve meaningful success had no idea they owed their comfortable lives to people like her, individuals willing to sacrifice personal recognition for national security. The shopping centers where they bought their designer handbags, the private schools where they planned to enroll their children, the very neighborhoods where they felt safe enough to host outdoor parties, all of it protected by a network of intelligence operatives whose existence they never considered. Amanda's voice cut through Rebecca's reflections as she launched into another round of well-meaning but misguided advice about life choices and priorities. Her sister had positioned herself near the elaborate dessert table, using her prominent pregnancy as both prop and authority, for dispensing wisdom about what constituted genuine accomplishment versus merely passing time in careers that offered no real future. The assembled women nodded, along with Amanda's pronouncements, their agreement reflecting the comfortable certainty of people whose biggest challenges involved managing household staff and coordinating children's extracurricular schedules. They spoke about stability and security, without understanding that both required constant vigilance from people willing to operate in shadows, to sacrifice personal comfort for collective safety. Jennifer Chen had discovered a shared connection with one of the other guests, leading to an animated discussion about their children's tennis lessons and summer camp applications. The conversation revealed the intricate planning required to maintain their lifestyle, the careful cultivation of social networks and educational opportunities that would ensure their offspring's continued membership in the privileged classes. Rebecca listened to their detailed strategies for securing advantages their children hadn't earned, and thought about the military families she'd worked alongside, couples who moved frequently for assignments that couldn't be explained to neighbors, children who attended multiple schools and learned to make friends quickly because operational requirements trumped stability. Those families understood sacrifice in ways these women never would, trading comfortable predictability for service to something larger than personal advancement. Katie Sullivan had appointed herself as unofficial coordinator of advice for Rebecca's life makeover, her enthusiasm for the project reflecting the kind of energy that people with too much time and too little real purpose brought to solving other people's problems. She'd produced a small notebook and was actually taking notes, as if Rebecca's transformation could be managed like an event planning checklist. The suggestions ranged from practical to absurd, each reflecting the speaker's fundamental misunderstanding of what Rebecca's life actually entailed. Someone proposed she use her organizational skills for party planning businesses. Another suggested corporate training workshops where her military background could provide team-building exercises for executive retreats. Every recommendation assumed that her military experience was somehow transferable to civilian pursuits, rather than representing a distinct career with its own measures of success and advancement. Maria Rodriguez had become particularly invested in the discussion, her recent success in launching a consulting firm making her feel qualified to guide others toward entrepreneurial ventures. She spoke about leveraging Rebecca's unique background to capture a niche market, about building a personal brand that could monetize her military experience for civilian audiences who fetishized authentic leadership, but preferred it packaged in comfortable corporate settings. The commodification of her service struck Rebecca as particularly offensive, the assumption that 18 years of genuine commitment could be repackaged as marketable content for business seminars and motivational speaking circuits. These women couldn't conceive of service that wasn't ultimately about personal advancement, sacrifice that didn't translate into profit margins or social media content. Patricia-Thompson had been observing this entire exchange with the kind of focused attention that reminded Rebecca of intelligence briefings where every detail mattered, and assumptions could prove fatal. Michael's mother possessed the rare ability to listen without judgment, to gather information without revealing her own conclusions, traits that suggested extensive experience in environments where careful observation was essential for survival. Patricia's late husband had indeed served in military intelligence, though the family had learned the full scope of his work only after his death, when security classifications expired, and previously secret operations were finally acknowledged. She understood the culture of silence that surrounded certain types of service, the way that significant achievements remained hidden while lesser accomplishments received public recognition. The recognition in Patricia's eyes was gradual but unmistakable, pieces of a familiar puzzle falling into place as she processed Rebecca's careful responses and observed her unconscious habits. The way Rebecca positioned herself near exits, her systematic visual sweeps of the gathering, her calm response to unexpected situations, all marked her as someone trained for environments far more challenging than baby showers and corporate boardrooms. Lisa Park had joined the chorus of women offering solutions for Rebecca's perceived problems, her suggestions reflecting the kind of superficial thinking that characterized people who'd never faced genuine adversity. She proposed image consultants and networking events, dating services specifically designed for professional women, as if Rebecca's single status represented failure, rather than choice or circumstance. The assumption that every woman's ultimate goal was marriage and motherhood irritated Rebecca more than the other misconceptions, though she maintained her diplomatic silence. These women couldn't imagine that someone might find fulfillment in protecting their country rather than planning gender reveal parties. That professional achievement might not require domestic validation to possess meaning and worth. Amanda's voice rose above the general conversation as she called for attention, her announcement delivered with the kind of theatrical flair she'd perfected through years of making presentations to corporate clients. She'd decided to share her plans for Rebecca's future, presenting them as generous sisterly guidance, rather than presumptuous interference in an adult's autonomous choices. The proposed intervention involved multiple components, each reflecting Amanda's confidence that Rebecca's problems stemmed from lack of proper guidance rather than different values and priorities. She'd researched career counseling services, identified potential networking opportunities, even located dating consultants who specialized in helping professional women find appropriate partners for building traditional families. Rebecca felt the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied situations where she was forced to choose between maintaining operational security and defending her choices against well-meaning but misguided family intervention. The classified nature of her actual work meant she couldn't explain why Amanda's assumptions were wrong, couldn't detail the significance of assignments that appeared mundane on unclassified personnel records. The irony was particularly sharp because Amanda's own success in marketing depended on protecting client confidentialities and maintaining competitive advantages through information control. Yet she couldn't extend that understanding to Rebecca's work, couldn't conceive that military intelligence might require similar discretion and that public recognition might actually compromise operational effectiveness. Michael had been watching this entire performance with growing discomfort, recognizing that his wife's public intervention was crossing boundaries that should have remained private family matters. His legal training had taught him to recognize when someone was being railroaded, when good intentions were being used to justify behavior that violated personal autonomy and dignity. But it was Patricia who finally interrupted Amanda's elaborate presentation, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had silenced boardrooms and commanded respect in military social circles. Her intervention would prove to be the catalyst that transformed the afternoon from embarrassing family drama into something none of them would ever forget. The moment of truth was approaching, though only Patricia seemed to understand that the assumptions driving this entire gathering were about to be shattered by revelations that would redefine everything they thought they knew about Rebecca Martinez. That's enough. Patricia Thompson's voice cut through Amanda's elaborate presentation like a blade through silk, her words carrying the kind of quiet authority that could silence rooms full of powerful men without raising volume or losing composure. The immediate hush that fell over the baby shower guests was profound, the kind of sudden silence that followed moments when social hierarchies shifted without warning. Amanda froze mid-sentence, her mouth slightly open, caught between surprise and indignation at being interrupted during what she'd conceived as a generous intervention on her sister's behalf. The other women exchanged uncertain glances, suddenly aware that they'd stumbled into dynamics they didn't understand, family tensions that ran deeper than sibling rivalry or career disagreements. Patricia stood slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, drawing every eye in the gathering. She was a woman accustomed to command, though she'd always exercised it through influence rather than volume, through knowledge rather than manipulation. Her late husband's military career had taught her to recognize valor when she encountered it, even when it wore civilian clothes and maintained operational silence. "Rebecca," Patricia said, her voice now gentle but still carrying unmistakable authority, "would you mind showing me that bracelet you're wearing?" The request seemed innocuous to the assembled guests, just another polite inquiry from an older woman making conversation. But Rebecca's immediate stillness, the way her hand instinctively moved to cover the thin silver band around her wrist, suggested significance that the others couldn't interpret. Michael found himself leaning forward, his lawyer's instincts recognizing that his mother had identified something crucial, some detail that would reframe everything they thought they understood about this gathering. He'd noticed the bracelet before but assumed it was simple jewelry, unremarkable personal adornment that held no particular meaning beyond aesthetic preference. Rebecca hesitated for a moment that stretched like an eternity, weighing operational security against family relationships, considering whether revelation would compromise future assignments, or simply change how these people perceived her past service. Her fingers traced the bracelet's surface, feeling the small engravings that most people would never examine closely enough to decipher. Patricia waited with the patience of someone who understood that certain truths couldn't be rushed, that people trained in intelligence work required time to process requests that touched on classified information. Her own years as a military wife had taught her to read the subtle signs that distinguished routine service from assignments that carried different levels of security and significance. Finally, Rebecca extended her arm, allowing Patricia to examine the bracelet more closely. What appeared, to casual observation, as simple silver jewelry, revealed itself under scrutiny as something far more specific, more significant. Tiny engravings marked dates and locations, coded references that would mean nothing to civilians but carried profound meaning for those familiar with military recognition systems. Patricia's intake of breath was barely audible, but Michael caught it, recognized the moment when his mother's suspicions crystallized into certainty. She traced one of the small engravings with her finger, reading inscriptions that transformed her understanding of Rebecca's service, from assumed routine assignments to confirmed extraordinary achievement. Amanda was growing impatient with the extended examination of what she considered irrelevant jewelry, her voice carrying an edge of irritation as she attempted to redirect attention back to her carefully planned intervention. Mother Thompson, we're trying to help Rebecca make some important decisions about her future. Maybe we could look at accessories later. But Patricia ignored her daughter-in-law's attempt to regain control of the conversation, her focus entirely concentrated on the evidence she held in her hands. When she looked up at Rebecca, her expression had transformed from polite interest to deep respect, the kind of recognition that passed between people who understood sacrifice in ways others never could. "Ladies," Patricia said, addressing the assembled guests with the kind of formal courtesy that preceded important announcements, "I believe we've all made some serious mistakes this afternoon." The statement hung in the desert air like a challenge, creating the kind of tension that preceded revelations capable of reshaping understanding. Jennifer Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Katie Sullivan glanced around nervously, sensing that the social dynamics they'd been navigating were about to change dramatically. Patricia lifted Rebecca's wrist, displaying the bracelet to the gathering with the reverence reserved for significant artifacts, though the other women still couldn't comprehend its importance. "This bracelet," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of certain knowledge, "is presented only to intelligence operatives who've completed assignments involving extraordinary risk to national security." The words fell into silence so complete that the distant sound of traffic seemed amplified, the desert wind through palm fronds suddenly audible in ways it hadn't been moments before. Amanda's expression shifted from irritation to confusion, her mind struggling to process information that contradicted everything she'd believed about her sister's career and achievements. Michael felt pieces of a complex puzzle suddenly arranging themselves into a coherent picture, fragments of conversation and observation forming a narrative that none of them had previously recognized. Rebecca's careful responses to questions about her assignments, her apparent comfort with challenging conditions, her disciplined bearing even in civilian settings, all of it now made perfect sense. "Each engraving," Patricia continued, her voice gentle but clear enough for everyone to hear, "represents a classified operation successfully completed. The dates correspond to assignments that have saved American lives, though the details will never be public knowledge." Rebecca's face remained composed, but Michael caught the slight tension around her eyes, the way someone looked when personal privacy was being invaded even for positive reasons. Years of operational security had taught her to maintain silence about her achievements, to find satisfaction in work that would never receive public recognition or civilian understanding. Maria Rodriguez was the first to break the stunned silence, her voice smaller than usual, lacking the confident authority she'd displayed while dispensing career advice to someone she'd assumed needed guidance. "You mean this whole time she's been one of the people who keeps you safe while you sleep," Patricia finished, her words carrying both respect for Rebecca and gentle reproach for the assumptions that had driven the afternoon's discussions. "The kind of operative who sacrifices personal recognition for national security, who can't discuss her achievements because doing so would compromise future assignments." The revelation rippled through the gathering like shockwaves, each woman processing the information according to her own capacity for understanding worlds beyond their immediate experience. Some looked embarrassed, recognizing the condescension they directed towards someone whose service dwarfed their own professional achievements. Others appeared confused, struggling to reconcile their image of military service with the sophisticated intelligence work that Rebecca actually performed. Amanda sat frozen, her elaborate plans for Rebecca's life transformation suddenly revealed as insulting presumption rather than sisterly guidance. The career counseling services she'd researched, the networking opportunities she'd identified, the dating consultants she'd contacted, all of it now appeared absurdly inadequate for someone whose actual work involved protecting national security at the highest levels. Michael stood slowly, his movement deliberate and respectful, drawing his wife's attention as he approached Rebecca with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. His legal training had taught him to recognize expertise when he encountered it, to respect competence regardless of the forms it took, but this revelation required a different kind of acknowledgement. When he stopped in front of Rebecca, Michael's posture shifted subtly, his civilian bearing giving way to something more formal, more ceremonial. The change was so pronounced that even the women who'd been dismissing Rebecca's service suddenly paid attention, sensing that something significant was about to occur. "Ma'am," Michael said, his voice carrying the kind of respect reserved for people who'd earned it through actions rather than titles. "Colonel." The words hung in the desert air like a benediction, finally giving Rebecca the recognition that her years of service had earned but never received in family settings. The formal address from her brother-in-law carried weight that the assembled women couldn't fully comprehend, acknowledgement of achievements that had been hidden behind operational security and modest demeanor. Rebecca's composure finally cracked slightly, not from embarrassment or discomfort, but from the unexpected relief of being seen for who she actually was rather than who others assumed she should become. Years of family gatherings where her service was minimized or misunderstood had taught her to expect dismissal rather than recognition, condescension rather than respect. Amanda's voice, when she finally found it, was barely a whisper, the kind of sound people made when their fundamental assumptions about reality suddenly proved false. "Colonel? You're actually a colonel?" The question revealed the depth of her misunderstanding, the way she'd constructed narratives about Rebecca's life based on surface observations and civilian assumptions rather than actual knowledge. The rank itself was impressive enough, but the circumstances that led to such advancement in intelligence work suggested achievements that went far beyond routine military service. Patricia moved to stand beside Michael, creating a united front of recognition and respect that transformed the social dynamics of the gathering completely. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd navigated military hierarchies and understood the significance of what they were witnessing. "Rebecca holds one of the highest security clearances available to military personnel," Patricia explained, her words directed toward Amanda but audible to everyone present. "Her assignments have involved preventing terrorist attacks, protecting critical infrastructure, gathering intelligence that saves lives on scales that most people can't imagine." The information continued to reshape understanding, each revelation adding layers to a story that none of them had previously comprehended. The women who'd spent the afternoon offering career advice to someone they'd assumed was drifting through life without purpose now found themselves confronting the reality that Rebecca's work was more consequential than anything they'd ever attempted. Jennifer Chen was visibly struggling with the cognitive dissonance, her voice uncertain as she attempted to reconcile her previous assumptions with the emerging truth. But she never said anything. She always seemed so quiet about what she did. "Because she couldn't say anything," Patricia replied, her patience evident but tinged with the kind of gentle correction that educated rather than humiliated. "Intelligence operatives don't discuss their work at baby showers. They don't share operational details with civilians. They protect national security by maintaining silence about activities that could be compromised by casual conversation." The lesson in operational security was delivered without condescension, but it effectively highlighted how little any of them understood about the world Rebecca actually inhabited. Their assumptions about military service had been shaped by movies and superficial media coverage, rather than knowledge of the complex realities that defined intelligence work at the highest levels. Michael remained standing at attention, his formal posture serving as ongoing acknowledgement of Rebecca's service and achievements. The gesture was particularly powerful, coming from someone whose own professional success had earned him respect in civilian circles, recognition that Rebecca's military accomplishments deserved equal consideration. Amanda finally stood, her movements uncertain, her carefully planned afternoon now revealed as a public humiliation of someone whose service protected the very lifestyle she'd been defending as superior. The irony was profound and painful, her criticism of Rebecca's choices now exposed as ignorant presumption rather than sisterly concern. When Amanda approached Rebecca, her steps were hesitant, her usual confidence replaced by the kind of uncertainty that accompanied moments when fundamental beliefs required revision. The sister she'd patronized for years had been protecting the country while she'd been building marketing campaigns, serving at levels of responsibility that dwarfed her own professional achievements. "Becca," Amanda said, her voice breaking slightly on the familiar nickname, "I had no idea. I didn't understand what you were actually doing." The apology was incomplete but genuine, reflecting the beginning of recognition rather than full comprehension of what had been revealed. Years of assuming superiority based on civilian success measures would require time to overcome, but the foundation for changed understanding had been established. Rebecca's response was characteristic in its generosity, the kind of grace that people developed when their satisfaction came from service rather than recognition, when their achievements were measured by lives saved rather than accolades received. She'd never needed Amanda's approval, though its absence had caused pain that she'd learned to carry quietly. "It's classified work," Rebecca said simply, her voice gentle but clear. "I couldn't explain what I do even if I wanted to. The safety of operations depends on operatives who can maintain silence about their achievements." The explanation highlighted the fundamental difference between their worlds. One where success was measured by public recognition and advancement up visible hierarchies. Another where achievement was defined by results that could never be publicly acknowledged or discussed at social gatherings. The other women began offering their own apologies, each reflecting different levels of understanding and embarrassment. Some grasped the significance of what had been revealed, while others struggled with concepts that challenged their basic assumptions about value and achievement in contemporary society. Katie Sullivan appeared particularly affected by the revelation, her earlier confidence in dispensing life advice now replaced by obvious discomfort with her own presumption. The networking strategies and career counseling services she'd recommended for someone whose work involved national security seemed ridiculous in retrospect, though her intentions had been genuinely helpful. Patricia took charge of the situation with the kind of graceful authority that could smooth over social awkwardness, while preserving everyone's dignity. Her years of military social functions had taught her to navigate revelations that disrupted civilian understanding without creating lasting embarrassment for well-meaning people who'd simply been operating with incomplete information. "Perhaps," Patricia suggested, her voice warm but decisive, "we should focus on celebrating Amanda's pregnancy rather than planning anyone else's future." The suggestion effectively redirected attention while allowing the gathered women to process what they'd learned, without feeling obligated to continue conversations they were ill-equipped to handle. Rebecca's service would continue to be classified, her achievements would remain largely unrecognized, but at least within this family gathering, her true contributions had finally been acknowledged. Michael remained standing until Rebecca indicated with a slight nod that his formal acknowledgement had been received and appreciated. His return to casual posture marked the end of the ceremonial moment, though the respect he'd demonstrated would influence family dynamics for years to come. Amanda sank back into her chair, the elaborate gift table and designer decorations now seeming trivial compared to the realities her sister navigated professionally. The baby shower continued, but its tone had fundamentally changed, the easy assumptions about success and failure replaced by more complex understanding of different forms of service and achievement. Rebecca retrieved her simple handbag and car keys, recognizing that her presence would continue to create awkwardness, while people processed revelations that challenged their basic assumptions. Her departure wouldn't be retreat, but strategic withdrawal, allowing others to adjust their understanding without the pressure of her continued presence. As she moved toward the side gate that led to the driveway, Patricia intercepted her with the kind of gentle authority that couldn't be refused. Her words were quiet, meant for Rebecca alone, carrying the weight of recognition from someone who truly understood the significance of intelligent service. "Thank you," Patricia said simply, "for everything you've done that we'll never know about." The acknowledgement was brief but profound. Recognition from someone whose own experience with classified service gave her words meaning that civilian gratitude couldn't match. Rebecca nodded once, accepting the thanks and the spirit it was offered, before continuing toward her car. The drive back to Phoenix gave Rebecca time to process the afternoon's events, the unexpected recognition, and its implications for future family relationships. She'd spent years accepting misunderstanding as the price of classified service, finding satisfaction in work that couldn't be publicly acknowledged or explained to relatives who measured success by civilian standards. The revelation wouldn't change her assignments or alter the classified nature of her work, but it had shifted family dynamics in ways that might prove beneficial for everyone involved. Amanda would need time to adjust her understanding, to recognize that different forms of service carried different types of value, but the foundation for improved relationships had been established. 3 days later, Rebecca received a package at her apartment, a small box with Amanda's return address and a note written in her sister's careful handwriting. Inside was a framed photograph from the baby shower, capturing the moment when Michael had acknowledged her service, preserving the recognition that had meant more than any formal military ceremony. The accompanying note was brief but significant, reflecting the beginning of changed understanding between sisters whose different paths had led to the same fundamental goal of serving something larger than personal advancement. Amanda's words were simple but sincere, acknowledging achievements she was finally beginning to comprehend. 6 months later, when Amanda's daughter was born, Rebecca was the first person called after the medical team, her sister's voice carrying the kind of excitement that included, rather than excluded, that recognized family bonds strengthened by understanding rather than weakened by assumption. The baby's middle name, chosen after considerable thought, honored service members who protected families like theirs, though their work would never be publicly recognized. Rebecca's career continued to require silence about her achievements, assignments that would remain classified long after her retirement, but within her family, the respect she'd earned through 18 years of service was finally acknowledged and appreciated. The baby shower revelation had transformed relationships in ways that formal recognition ceremonies never could, creating understanding between people who'd chosen different forms of service but shared fundamental values about protecting what mattered most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.